All right, Margaret Floyd Barry. It's ridiculously impossible for me to contain my excitement for this conversation. So I'm just going to jump us in. In fact, I'm going to switch the order around just a tiny bit because I usually say how I'm connected, but I can't help but begin by saying I think of you as one of my closest friends, and we are in touch a great deal. So those who are paying any attention to these conversations will notice I'm a little more bouncy and excited to get to connect with you than usual. We'll say more about that in a moment. But enough of me. Please, Margaret, take a moment to introduce yourself in whatever way you'd like to share.
Oh, I am so excited to be here as well. So I am a functional nutritionist and restorative wellness practitioner. And really what that means is I help people restore their health through manipulating the diet, bringing in nutritional supplements, and looking at lifestyle factors. So this can be anything from helping somebody who's feeling pretty good to really optimizing. This can also be someone who is really quite sick and has been struggling with some chronic degenerative disease for many years, reverse that process and bring them back to full thriving health through these tools of diet, supplements, and lifestyle.
Awesome. And there's lots more I could prompt you to say about you, but I will just explain, as I do with every interview that I have, how I'm connected to the person I'm interviewing. So this is especially fun. We aren't just randomly good friends who bumped into each other walking down the street. You hired me for my first job ever in the sustainability field in 2003 when you were on the senior management team at CBSR, Canadian Business for Social Responsibility. So in a roundabout kind of way, you are responsible for everything that's happening here and now. This is like karma when it comes home to roost. And now, of course, you're in a very different role, and I'm excited that you're doing that. And we'll make sure it's easy for people to find out lots more about what you're doing, the books you've written, the podcasts you're on, all the awesome things that you do. So thanks for making time today.
And then just a full circle moment. I will just say this is a full circle moment.
It is. It's I'm going to think of it as a full spiral moment, like an upward spiral, because these things, we don't just go round and round repeating, sort of iterating in some kind of progression. I'm not entirely sure where it's going, but I want to just double check, as well as I always do with folks I'm doing these interviews with. Do you have any commercial relationship with JBS, the company we're about to talk about?
Not to my knowledge at all.
All right. I'm going to guess some of your clients might have eaten them. Just to,
I mean, I might have too. I don't honestly know, but not. So perhaps I have purchased and consumed products unknowingly.
Yeah.
But me, myself, I'm certainly not on their payroll.
Lovely. Well, here we are. Before I jump into more detailed questions about your thoughts on JBS, I always like to set the stage a bit about the future that you would like to see. And I'm going to frame that up a little bit more. As you know, because you got me into this field, there's a lot of terms in the sustainability field, from corporate social responsibility, as we used to call it back in the day, everything from things like regenerative agriculture, the circular economy, sustainability more broadly, all kinds of jargon that may or may not serve the cause. I think it's much more useful to hear in your own words, what is the future you want? What does it look like? What's it like?
To me, it's all about furthering life. And when I say life, I mean life in all its forms. So yes, human life, of course, animal life, plant life. I mean, life on this planet. You talk a lot about industrial healing. I think a lot about physiological healing, but all of this really, for me, comes down to furthering life, and not just extending life, but really thinking about quality of life at absolutely every level on the spectrum. I think about the diversity that's required for that, the interconnections that are required for that, the relationships to self, to other, to what we consume, to what we tend to. All of it, for me, is about furthering life and increasing the quality of life across the board.
I love it. let's hover here for just a moment, because you have a very different view than, or you bring a different set of expertise and perspective than the other folks I'm chatting with. I'm wondering if there are specific things you look for in that future. Like, how would you know it if you saw it? What does that look like when you see that healing taking place? And I'm leading the witness a little, so only go there if you want to, but are there textures that you can add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I see a food economy that is based primarily on real whole foods, with things that are, processed as the rare indulgence as opposed to the core staple of our diet. So really, truly nourishing ourselves. I see that food economy being built on a system that is actually supporting and increasing life. So increasing biodiversity, regenerating the soil, and really deeply restoring. I'm a restorative wellness practitioner, so really deeply restoring health, not just of humans, but at every stage in the process. And kind of the beautiful thing about this is that when we make those choices and we pivot things to a point where we're looking to nourish ourselves, the things that actually nourish us the most are actually the things that nourish the soil, that nourish diversity of ecology, that that nourish everything across the board. It's this self-reinforcing system, right? You talk about the spiral. It's just this progression towards more diversity, more resilience, more strength, so that when bugs or viruses come, we have the capacity to kind of move through that and not just be decimated by it. It's the same kind of thing in that, in like an ecosystem, right? If you don't have the diversity, a bug going through a forest is going to create a totally different reality if that is, a replanted forest of one type of tree versus the natural diversity you would find in the original forest. So I feel like, whereas right now we're trending in this direction of hyper processed food, depending on a very small select group of monocrops that are dramatically depleting the soil, thus requiring fossil fuels to try to fix this broken system, creating just absolute crap when it comes to diet, making people sick, now leading into, it's just this spiral in the wrong direction. That can feel very overwhelming, but really it just takes a little shift. And we do the things in the other direction, that it just self-reinforces and self-reinforces and self-reinforces in a really beautiful direction, where you get thriving, healthy people, plants, animals, ecosystems world. That sounds too good to be true, but it's extremely possible.
Yeah.
Part of it is
I love it.
Totally possible.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I'm, as the omniscient narrator that I sometimes play in these conversations, I'm going to point and make sure I reference in the video of this, the conversation with Judith Schwartz, who also brought a similar but different perspective, really coming from the ecosystem restoration, that restorative wellness at a landscape level, in our conversations about Danone. So lots of complementarity. I don't think you're crazy in the slightest. I think it's more than possible. And I love it. I'm glad I asked for that deeper texture. Thank you. Let's dive in then. If you wouldn't mind holding that beautiful, more than possible future, and our hearts do know it's possible, to nod to good old Charles Eisenstein. Hold that as a thought bubble as we go through the next couple questions, because it's with that in mind that I'd like to compare your understanding of JBS. I'm going to start in the positive, and as much as you know, and realizing you're not an expert in JBS, so go as deep or as broad as you like. When you think about the positive impacts of this company, and that would mean it's contributing to that future that you want, what activities or impacts come to mind? What examples can you give in as much detail as you can?
Absolutely. Well, so disclaimer, I don't know very much about this company at all, but what I do know is that it produces meat. And contrary to popular opinion, protein from animal sources is the single most important macronutrient there is, and is absolutely integral to our future, our health. It is integral to food regenerative agriculture and to actually repairing the soil done well. That's so I'm not saying that I don't know enough about JBS's practices, but what I'm saying is the fact that they provide this nutrient is a really important and key starting point, which means that the core of their business, what they offer in terms of a product into the world, the core essence of it, animal protein, is essential for life. And so right there, there is huge opportunity, possibility, and responsibility.
Mm-hmm. Great. Any other positives you want to throw in before we flip the switch and go over to the negatives?
I don't know enough about their business overall to know what they're, to know what they're doing. I mean, I'm assuming that they're employing people. I'm assuming that
Right.
they're, contributing sort of in those kind of basic economic ways, but that I don't know that that's unique. I mean, that's any business
Yeah.
hires people. So I really don't know enough about the rest of their business to be able to comment. I just see this core line of business providing animal protein is truly essential to human survival and to
Cool.
planetary survival. I think it's really important in terms of like actual, looking at environmental sustainability, replenishing soils. Animals have a very important role to play in that context.
Cool. All right, let us go to the dark side for a moment and think about negative impacts, activities, etc. And this is again with your future in mind, where you see JBS or the kind of activity that you understand they're up to undermining that future that you want.
Right. Well, again, not knowing in great detail about their practices, but knowing at, the scale at which they're producing the animal protein lends me to believe that they would lean more into like major industrial practices. And there's a saying in the field amongst those people who are recognizing the critical importance of animal protein. It's not the cow, it's the how. So it's really, I would say the place of the biggest negative impact can be, cows in particular. I'm going to focus on cows because I actually don't even know if they do other animals, but I want to focus
They
on
do pork, lamb, chicken as well.
Okay.
I think pork and chicken is a big part of their business. Lamb is, but they're known for their beef. For sure, those other animal meats are in the mix.
Okay. So there are ways, well-documented, well-studied ways to grow cows and other animals in a way that really replenishes the soil and creates biodiversity. And then there are ways of doing it that do the exact opposite. And that dramatically contribute to, overgrazing, deforestation, polluting of waterways, excessive use of different kinds of synthetics. I mean, all of the sort of bad things that we associate with industrial agriculture can absolutely be applied to any kind of animal practices. And I think that given the critical nature of animal protein in our diet, and given the attack that it is under by very well-meaning but often misguided and sort of misinformed groups in terms of like, animal, there is a belief out there that animal protein is the reason that we have some of the key environmental crises that we do. And that's actually not accurate. It's how those animals are raised. It's so industrial farming processes and practices can be incredibly detrimental and are incredibly detrimental to all the things that are required for life, regardless of whether you're growing plants or animals. So it really, it's the farming practices, I think, that are one of the key places of doing potential harm. And real, I shouldn't say potential, significant and real harm. So that's a really key piece of the puzzle. And I think it's an even bigger deal given the fact that animal protein is under attack, and when it is grown in these ways and does cause damage, it gives further fodder to the meat is bad agenda, which is actually indirectly then contributing to a lot of nutritional issues vitamin deficiencies, mineral deficiencies, anemias. I mean, one of the best sources of bioavailable iron is red meat. We have like what was the number I read recently? Like 1.62 billion people in the world are anemic. It is a really, really important nutrient. And when it is easily sort of demonized because of the production, and when the production of this incredibly important nutrient is so harmful, there's all sorts of spillover effects to that. And people can jump to the conclusion that there are a plant-based alternative, because it isn't perceived as harmful in terms of its environmental impacts, is a better alternative, is actually really doing even more harm than good.
Mm-hmm.
That's one piece of it. Another piece of it, I would say, and again, I don't know the in depth about the business model, but just a quick perusal of their website, I didn't actually see any like cuts of steak or even good old like ground beef or anything like that. I saw loads of packaged, highly processed foods, which we know are going to be hyper palatable, driving overconsumption. As soon as we do lots of processing, we're going to be denaturing those proteins and depleting this incredibly nutrient dense food of the key nutrients that make it so valuable. So that could also be another place of quite significant harm, taking this really incredible nutrient and actually denaturing it and processing it and turning it into something that's actually quite harmful from a nutritional perspective and a health perspective. So those would be kind of the two really big buckets that I think of, is the environmental implications of the production techniques, and then the health implications, as well as environmental implications and energy implications of just mass processing of this incredibly important nutrient that really doesn't need that much at all. I mean, throw a steak in a frying pan with some butter and a little bit of sea salt, you're good, right? It does not have to be that much more complicated than that.
Yeah, I love it. And we could easily go down a rabbit hole of how you had really helpful and informative influence on my own dietary journey, but we'll hold that thought for perhaps another conversation. I'm going to share my screen, I hope. Tell me if you see a slide that has your name at the top of it. Do you see that?
I do.
Cool. Okay, I'm going to set this up a little bit. I will first preface by saying this is an impossibly ridiculous non-functioning diagnostic tool. So I'm asking you to humor me on something kind of ridiculous. And I'm going to explain basically how it works. I'm going to ask you to tell me where to put this bubble, which represents the company of JBS, on this matrix. And the vertical axis is the impact on ecosystem health. So everything above the midpoint is contributing to the health of the ecosystem. Everything below the midpoint is undermining the health of the ecosystem. The horizontal is the health of society, people, ourselves as individuals, and our wider human community. And everything to the right of the midpoint is contributing to the wellness of society. Everything to the left of the midpoint is undermining. Recognizing this is a very impossibly oversimplified exercise, and also you have prefaced, and I think it's fair to remind here, you're not claiming to be an expert in JBS. So I just want to, and I say this to everybody, you have the option to totally opt out of this and just say like, this is too ridiculous. And the logic of asking you this is less to give a perfect assignment of a diagnosis of where they should be, and more to hear why, like your reasoning about why you say what you say. So with that, I'll be quiet and ask you, what do you think I should do with this bubble?
I'd move that bubble down to, and I'd put it actually squarely on the line. So in terms of the social, I feel like I don't know enough, and I can give you a reason because I can make arguments for the benefits and arguments for the downsides. But in terms of the environmental, I'd put it maybe a little bit lower than where you have it right now. And I want to say that I keep it there. And what I would say is the thing that I find really interesting about this company, maybe I'm jumping ahead, is I see the potential for a company like this to actually be really strong +5 in the upper right quadrant of both. Like I see the potential, and it would require, I would imagine, a massive reimagining of the company. I do see, some companies, just their very business model, like the core business offering is challenging. Whereas JBS, it is, there's the potential for this to be truly life life-giving and of tremendous value. And that's not actually very common. So I would put it here. So when I'm thinking about the ecosystem health, I'm making a lot of assumptions in terms of, just a quick perusal of things. I know I've heard of things about like deforestation and things like that. So I think the industrial farming practices do have very significant, do significant damage from an ecosystem perspective. So just making lots of assumptions that they're using this sort of standard industrial, high intensity feedlot practices, especially, we're talking about beef. It's actually even more so when we start expanding into chicken, and pork. The environmental impacts of those are significantly worse because those really strongly depend on grain for production, as opposed to cattle, which still spend even feedlot cattle spend the vast majority of their life on grass. Now there's potential for overgrazing 100%, but it's not requiring the growing of a monocrop and everything that goes into that to then feed the animal, which is the case with both chicken and pork. So I put them down on the ecosystem health piece. And one reason why I've got them very neutral in terms of societal health is because of the critically important role of protein. And so if somebody told me that they had to make a choice between no protein and protein that had been processed, I would choose the protein that had been processed. And I'm sure there's people who could take me out on that argument for sure, but protein is an incredibly important macronutrient. There's a 1,000,001 qualifiers of how much processing, what have they done to it? What have they added? I can't hope to answer that. But what I'm trying to kind of point out here is that source of protein is really important. And so sometimes, and I'm a major believer in quality. But would I have somebody consume, if we're going to choose between processed foods, would I choose a lot of processed starches and sugars, and just high carbohydrate type of processed, which is what most people are consuming, versus one that is processed but animal protein? At least they're getting the protein in that. So it's certainly far from perfect, but it's not quite as detrimental. The more I'm talking, the more I feel like maybe it should be sort of one little step over in terms of the societal health. So yeah, a little bit to the left. So it's not like maybe quite that neutral, but I think that the biggest place where it would have a negative impact right now is from an ecosystem perspective, as opposed to a social perspective.
Yeah, gotcha. Have I got it in the right place here? Is
Yeah,
it
I think. And acknowledging that this is, I agree, a ridiculous nation.
Yes.
It means nothing. But in terms of talking points, those would be the key things I'd focus on there.
Love it. Okay, thank you so much for humoring that and agreeing that it is ridiculous. I'm going to stop sharing here and come back into our little reality here. And I love how you kind of signaled a more imaginative and opportunity-oriented reality. So with that, I'm going to take us through a couple more questions that will bring us home. These last two are very much sort of scenario-based and using imagination and going into whatever space you want to take us into. So the first one is, this just in, I just got a really exciting piece of news. And the headline is that you are in charge of the universe, everything. Nothing's in the way. There are no limits. And with you being in charge of everything, I'm curious what you would change at JBS.
So number one is I would change the business model in terms of the how, not the animals. I would really focus on digging in deep, taking the resources that this huge company has and really channeling them into truly regenerative ag. Not sort of greenwashed, we're going to pretend regenerative ag. I'm talking local scale, allowing for, it's going to look different regions of the world. I'm not the expert on it, but it's going to integrate animals of different types, and really actually regenerate the soil, dramatically reduce, if not completely get rid of all synthetic fertilizers, herbicides, all the stuff that we're, pesticides that we're reliant on with these heavy monocrops, and really focusing on stimulating and initiating that process that I talked about, that positive spiral, by creating a food economy that is based on truly nutrient dense whole foods. animals being an essential cornerstone to that. I'm not saying don't eat plants. I love plants, but all of it together, the animals need to be integrated within that. And through this, really changing, as right now, the food that's the most affordable, the food that's the most available is crap. It's a hyper processed, heavily subsidized, really grown out of, what is it, like 3 or 4 main monocrops of rice, soy, corn, and wheat, really moving away from that into what truly nutrient dense foods where animals are an integral part. They're living beautiful, happy lives with sort of one bad day. And that being the cornerstone of our food production, that is what is the most affordable option. That anything that is hyper processed, the true cost of that, both from a health perspective and from what it takes in terms of inputs, energy inputs, chemical inputs, that's actually reflected in the price, so that the whole food system is flipped. And what's most available, what's most affordable, and what's the foundation of the diet is nutrient dense whole foods, not hyper processed, hyper palatable foods that are poisoning us slowly over time. That would be where, and I would see JBS having a really integral role in that, and in changing its resource allocation away from these big industrial operations into more local, smaller scale, but using that as a way of kind of subsidizing the way that we subsidize big monocrops, really subsidizing the smaller farms to stimulate this whole process of regenerative agriculture, which I believe profoundly could be extremely profitable in the long term, extremely profitable. Along with that, and, kind of as part of this, so just the way the food is grown, also just the really moving resources away from processing foods to thinking about creative ways of using the entire animal. Whether that is thinking about, bone marrows, beef tallows, like cooking, traditional animal fats, there's a few companies using those and packaging those and selling those as resources, like scaling that so that we have this, the vegetable oils that are doing so much damage, and flipping that out for the traditional animal fats, making those more available, much more affordable. Again, I see this as being highly profitable down the road. It would require an incredible shift in terms of, reimagining the way that the food industry is being done. But in a company the size of JBS, the brilliant thing of this is that the pockets are deeper. And I realize it's not as simple as I'm making it sound, but there's the opportunity to stimulate some really powerful change really quickly, which is exactly what we need. Because if we keep going, we don't have a lot of years left of food on planet Earth. It's like between 50 and 60 years. Like, it's actually really freaking scary when you do some math looking at the dramatic increase in soil depletion and erosion. And it's just, I don't even want to think about that. But we have the solution, and a company like JBS could really be the key for that. So, as I said, thinking about nose to tail use, thinking about how to use, different uses of the marrow, things like, the different types of animal fats, the organ meats, the bones for bone broth. I mean, all of these things, these traditional, in traditional cultures, no part of that animal would go wasted. And now it goes to pet food, which I guess isn't fully waste, but it just seems like perhaps not the best use of these incredibly, the most nutrient dense part of the animal is the organ meat. And it's not that everyone suddenly has to start eating beef heart, but there's creative ways of using those resources such that we can get them into the diet and integrate it into the diet. And a company like JBS could be really at the forefront of developing that.
I love it. It breaks my heart to note that it was fake news, that you are not actually in charge of the universe, although it was a very fun moment while it lasted. But I just got a new headline, which is almost as good. It's that although you're not in charge of the universe, the CEO of JBS, Gilberto Tomazoni, he really appreciates your point of view. He wants to know what you think. He takes your calls. The thing is, he's pretty busy running this big global company, so he doesn't have a lot of time. You've got him on the line for 30 seconds. What do you say?
I would say your industry is essential for life and has the opportunity to truly change the course of the health of all living creatures. And you have one of the few industries that is truly required in moving forward to sustain and further life. This is an incredible opportunity. You are poised to make a ton of money from it. Please do it.
Nice. Well, we don't know what happens with these conversations, but as you know, this will be public, and I am hopeful that somebody on his team, if not him, will actually hear it. But again, that was a little bit of fake news. You are, alas, not on the phone with Gilberto Tomazoni. And that was the last question that I prepared for you. But is there anything I didn't ask you about that you want to make sure you leave on the table here before I give you back your afternoon?
I guess I just want to say that there are, and I've kind of hinted at this throughout, that some industries, when you have this conversation, it's a tough nut to crack, right? Like you think of like a plastics company or something that really depends on, mining fossil fuels, like those companies, it's a harder, you have to kind of go through some mental gymnastics to find a place for those companies in a truly sustainable future when we're thinking about in the conversation of industrial healing. What's unique, and I think a really powerful opportunity for a company like JBS, is that the very nature of the business is essential for human, like it is not detrimental, it is essential for human survival. There's a huge opportunity and there's templates for how to do this. This isn't something that has to be invented. This is a return. And it is a transition, of course, is new territory and all of that kind of thing. But it's a rare opportunity. And when we first talked about this interview, I was like, oh gosh, what are we even going to say? And it was a little bit of a depressing thought. And then the more that I have been thinking about this and the role of a company like JBS, I'm actually really excited because I think that they could be pivotal in creating the future and like changing the course of the direction that we are going when it comes to our relationship with the environment, and not looking at it as this resource that we just pillage and plunder, but truly creating a beautiful, harmonious, balanced relationship with it, not overgrazing, not just leaving. I mean, land that's just sort of left to do its, left it fallow. It is an integral role for animals in all of this. And so it can be done. It can be done. There's templates for it. You're not starting from scratch. So I feel like there's so much hope. And it can happen quickly. I mean, I just to use another example, I can remember, and I think Lorraine, you and I were working together when this happened, when like Walmart decided to just source organic tomatoes. I mean, it changed the entire tomato industry. It was one little tiny decision. Like imagine the impact a company like JBS could have in the entire food industry. It's just, there's such a huge opportunity and possibility and responsibility. Those are the three words that I think of when I think of JBS. I think opportunity, possibility, and responsibility.
I love it. Thank you. Oh yeah. Thank you. I'll just add a little coda onto this that will probably spawn other conversations for you and me offline, and perhaps with others in relation to this assessment. That today, apparently Walmart, I haven't had a chance to look, but Walmart's stock is tanking and there's a whole bunch of murmurings in the market. And I was chatting about this offline elsewhere that, they are trying to make really good decisions, and the model that they're in that incentivizes quarterly returns is broken. So I love the idea of JBS adopting this sense of, the possibility, the responsibility, and this opportunity. And they have this challenge of being within a broken system that demands endless returns. So I'm hopeful that wisdom like what you're bringing to the table around eating well and the potential for animals to be part of our restorative wellness is enough to loosen this hold that the endless financial returns have on our collective brains, because they're kind of like a helmet that's on too tight. Anyways, that's a whole other story, and obviously I have reasons for that metaphor. I will pause there and say thank you very, very much, Margaret, for your time. Any parting words before I pause the recording here?
I do. I have one more thing to say, something I forgot to say earlier. Something I think that's important to remember is that there's a big, fierce competitor coming for companies like JBS, which is biotech and the lab grown meat and all of this, like this very, very hyper processed, but plant-based and these options that have the sort of greenwashed veneer of moral, ethical, environmental superiority. And those are no small, there's a ton of money behind that. And those, I think that would be actually one of the biggest threats from a competitive perspective for a company like JBS, because meat's got a really bad reputation out there right now. It is, I mean, me sitting here as a nutritionist saying that red meat is a good thing to eat.
I know, yeah.
A lot of people who would come at me and just like,
oh, I know.
rip a strip off of me for this, right? And there's solid, I'm not saying this just because that's how I feel and I like to, I was vegetarian for a long time, and well, don't need to go into the personal story side of things, but there's good data behind all of this. I'm not just speaking, I'm not pulling this out of my tush, but what I will say is that there's real money and real investment and huge interests in going into this hyper processed fake meat, like the lab grown meat. I mean, these things, and so just from a competitive perspective, the more that a company like JBS can pivot to really invest in regenerative ag, there's a huge competitive advantage to that, because there's no way that like the fake meat companies will ever be able to do that. They're based on like just incredible amounts of energy inputs, synthetic fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides, all of that kind of thing. These huge monocrops. The model is based entirely on industrial farming. And the way to take that out, in my opinion, is to just completely pivot and throw it into regenerative ag. And then you've got everything. And you've got the nutritional component, you've got the environmental component, you've got the social component. And you're literally building life, which the fake meat is not at all. So I think take out any of the warm and fuzzies, straight up business risk assessment. I just think it's the smart thing to do looking down the road. I mean, right now it might not feel like a threat, but I can tell you it's going to be a threat. Yeah.
I love it. I know they're dabbling in it. I don't know what degree of their bottom line is in that, but it's on their radar and in their annual report, but in a small way.
Oh man, please don't go that route. Please don't go that route. Fight it.
Yeah, I love it, because what you're describing is pivoting towards an economy that works in service of life. So I'm all for that. Let's do it. Thank you again. I'm going to pause here. Much appreciation, and have a great rest of the afternoon there.
Thank you.